All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Right after lunch, I know this is the hardest session to sit through, so food coma starts to settle in. How many of you were at the session with Design Thinking 101 with Jill and okay, we got just a couple. All right, so the topic that the reason why I ask is the topic we're having is kind of the next phase of the process after they pick up. So just wanted to give a little bit of context to those who were there. My name's Robb Neuenschwander. I'm a principal architect with Mindset, and my colleague here.
My name's Stephanie Lodewegen. I'm a finance manager with Ecolab.
So, the goal for this session is for us to outline the types of activities that happen after design thinking takes place. And we take that design and the solution that was identified and bring that to fruition in a real world scenario. So Stephanie served a vital role as a product owner in an implementation that we recently did with Ecolab that was very successful. And she's going to provide her insights and background for that. And I'm going to provide some color commentary on the side, but mostly let the star of the show kind of help you understand what it was like to go through that, and hopefully take some questions and get your questions answered as we go along. Okay. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk about Springboard, which is an application platform that Stephanie's work was vital to helping to extend. There's been multiple iterations of it, and we'll go through some of that history at a fairly high level. And then we'll talk specifically around the project that Stephanie led, the AVP. And then we'll talk through the design thinking process that we engaged as the leading component of this project and the outputs. And then most of the conversation will be about what did that look like as we brought that design thinking output into a delivery scenario. Okay? So I'm going to let Stephanie talk a bit about this.
Thank you so much. So the history of Springboard is the Ecolab term for the Fiori application that was built. And so Ecolab started on their SAP journey maybe the mid 2010s, so probably 2015, and we had a homegrown system for pretty much every function within the business, and the main one that really started the Springboard project was for our corporate accounts teams. So the teams that are working to administer pricing to all of our end user customers, and it's a very large team. There's a lot of different pricing activities that happen and a high volume. So there were, as they moved from our homegrown systems into SAP, there was an identified need that, things were going to break as we're changing systems. So at a minimum, we needed to have some tool that was going to meet the activities that were happening prior to SAP. And so they were looking for to have the improved visibility. They want to have governance, ensure that we're protecting cash flow when you're talking about pricing with customers, right? That's a very exciting topic that people get very passionate about, and really the cost that it's taking for the company to administer that. So we can't go from a homegrown system that we're somewhat efficient in and then go to our new SAP platform and completely break the processes and suddenly need 100 more people to administer the same activities. So that was really the objective of this Springboard tile. And what they did, the first iteration, if you want to go to the next slide, it was that agreements and incentives piece. And so the teams that are working in that was the corporate account finance teams, and then they were using it as a way to work with the sales organization. So it was really a partnership within a commercial team to leverage governance, ensure that they're reducing work, doing it more effectively and efficiently, and that they, were actually able to not only meet that goal of having a custom application that met the needs of the business. With this Fiori application, it actually exceeded it. They got more than what they had in our previous environments. So that really helped the Springboard tile be really accepted by the business, and something that set us up for the next step, which was membership lists, so that was to open it up to other Ecolab business divisions. They kind of have the exception pricing, or they're the more complex pieces, right? So they weren't willing to go onto a new custom platform, right, and a new tool without having it be proven with our standard business. So because that went so well, they decided to roll out for the membership lists. And then my piece, what, as Rob said, that we're going to talk about is the AVP outreach. So this was leveraging some of the same users that are in this Springboard tile and tool, but leveraging it and having access for a functional team. So I work within Global Business Services, a shared services organization, and bringing the efficiencies and all of the continuity into the function. So from an Ecolab perspective, that was the really exciting piece, right? Is that we're able to take work from the business and then now start spreading it and filtering it throughout the organization. And they're actually going to, they're in flight of doing a 4th iteration. So
Just getting started, right?
Yep.
The only thing I would add, that was a great background, the capabilities that are driving the business are underneath. They're in the underlying SAP platforms and the Vistex platform. And that's why they chose those platforms, because they can perform those business functions. What Springboard did over the top of that, and Stephanie alluded to this across all 3 of those, was provided workflow, approvals, structure, and governance around accessing those SAP capabilities. And the capabilities themselves were really not very easy to use out of the box. I mean, the user experience on those was pretty disastrous to their productivity. And so the whole goal of this was to enable them to still have use of those capabilities, which were very important for the business, but to do it in a way that didn't kill productivity and enabled a richer experience on top of it. And so very successful in that regard. Okay. So you want to talk about AVP?
Yeah. So the AVP project was, as we started moving from our workflow system and our mainframe system, right, we had a homegrown custom tool that we used, right, in our old ERP system. And when we moved to SAP, we identified and knew that one of our major processes that my team completes was going to break. And due to time constraints, resource constraints, funding constraints, it was put on the back burner. So for 3 years, I tried to partner with internal teams to try and get something, right? So this process that my team had been doing, we leveraged an Access database to generate emails for us. It had some metrics, some tracking, was reading into the system and getting some information to do workflows for us. And when we moved to SAP, we literally had nothing. So it meant that the team was now sending thousands of manual emails, checking 5 or 6 different screens within Vistex and SAP to get the information that they needed to make a decision, and then managing, right, hundreds of emails that needed a 3-day turnaround time, compiling all of that, coming back together, and then having to route it to other groups to take action because of SODs, and then pull it back. So it was 3 years of really painful processes for my team, eroded business service levels, and frankly, the process was so complex, we could not build another option. We tried, right? We tried to do Power Apps, we tried to do different macros and Outlook rules, and after trying multiple times, I had a new leader come in and she said, "What's your number one initiative?" And I said, "This outreach project. It affects the business, it affects the team. It's not working, we need something." And she had come from a group that they had launched the Springboard. She had been in the team when they launched the first tile. So she said, "Let's see if we can pull this in because it fits. It's the same users. It's a similar concept. It's similar work. Let's see if we can bring it to this function." Great. And so really, what it broke down to is there was 2 pieces. So there's a research component that my team has to do where they have tons of different information that they need to compile and pull together from various places in SAP just to even make a decision, to even know what they're looking at. And then the second piece was kind of what I was speaking about with like that we needed to replace the emails and implement some type of standardization for these approvals, right? It's just improving workflow, giving us visibility to metrics. We had no visibility to how many emails were being sent, what was the success rate, what was the turnaround time. There was no visibility. It was completely manual. And so we broke the project into those, those two phases and scope. And so this slide, let me see it.
This is the research one.
Oh, yep. So for research, Ecolab has a business model that, we're working through distribution. So if you think about just selling product to a customer and pricing, now we're putting a third party into that. And we're putting a month delay, and we're putting multiple sales associates into it who all have a say in it and want to change things. So the number of pricing agreements and authorizations and all of this massive amount of information was really time consuming for the teams to go through it. And so the research piece was phase one. We were able to deploy that, I think it was in August, is when we went live with that piece. And so my team was able to save a full resource, one full person, just from the efficiencies that they gained of having all of this information compiled into one place. I joke about this, but in all seriousness, there have been multiple people who have been in the team for years and knew how it was in the old way, lived through these 3 years of pain and then had this new tool launch, and there were tears, right? People were so relieved and so grateful to have this efficiency. It really changed the quality of work for my team and their effectiveness in the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So from the research phase, these are all different places in SAP and other systems that the teams would have to go find a piece of information here, cross-reference it with a piece of information there, use that data point to go look into another system. And so they're jumping around to 6 different places. And when we built the research app, all of that was consolidated into one interface, and they were able to use that interface to go pull data from all these different areas and get one consolidated view to it. And so that was the big win.
Yeah, and then the second piece, which is what we deployed at the end of September, so this was our phase 2, was the routing, right? So now the team has been working in it. They've been using it to make their decisions and have the research. They were still sending the manual out emails. But then now with this routing, we were able to engage our agreement owners, our customer master data team, our pricing team, and then my team. So these are all different people that have ownership and segregation of duty and different security access in the system, where someone has to approve one thing before it can flow to the next stage, and then once it flows from there, the next person can take action. And so this routing really has given us a ton of visibility into the tracking to know who's not engaged from a sales perspective and who's not responding. I think that's been the most eye-opening, because we've been able to have conversations now to say, why do you have 100 cases that we've sent you in the last 2 weeks and you haven't looked at one of them? Like, what's going on? We never had that visibility before. So it's really enabling us to have meaningful conversations with the business, whereas before it was just always kind of this, we feel like maybe you're not responding. Now we have the proof, and we have how many days have these cases been sitting with you. The other thing that's been really great is the tracking tile. The view is the same for all of the users, and so there's tons of different data points that we've been able to pull in, so users can customize their view. So some of those conversations that we've been having of, well, why are you not responding? They say, well, it's missing this piece of information. And I was able to really quickly say, oh, you can save your custom view, you can share it with your entire team. All you have to do is pull in these extra fields. And that's gotten an improved response rate. So it's really been extremely challenging or life-changing from a business perspective, right? And as a leader, how can I coach effectiveness with my team, and how can I coach stakeholder engagement? This tool has been, life-changing in that way.
Cool. And so this is UX4ERP development on top of their SAP system. They have a suite on HANA. System in Vistex used for the pricing and agreements. Yeah, the tool, the platform has been wildly successful, really popular, and so we're super pleased about that. The main points that we want to talk about here, the reason why you're here, is to hear how design thinking was leveraged at a high level, but mostly for us to describe for you the process that came after design thinking, and we built this solution that was so life-changing to Stephanie and her team. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about. So this is called design thinking-ish, and the reason why we said that is Jill, in her presentation this morning, talked about the different stages of design thinking and the scoping and the discovery work that happens on the front end, where you're doing, kind of problem identification, and really getting crystal clear and understanding on what those problem sets are, and then we go to framing and solutioning, where we say, okay, how are we going to solve that problem? In this particular case, when Ecolab came to us, they said, look, we had a tool. It fit our needs before. We know what it did. We've even mocked up prototypes of what we think this needs to do. We know where all the data is. We have all this great understanding of our problem. We need help with how do we build a solution for that. And so in the spirit of meeting them where they're at, we focused primarily on this framing piece, okay? And so our design thinking, which can be an elaborated process that starts with the scoping and works through the discovery into framing, was consolidated to this. And we call this, we had a design workshop that we executed, and we're calling this a UX embedded development process right now. And so it's just another way that we can still work with you on iterative process design. From this point forward, everything that came after it is still standard to what we do with design thinking. It had the same outputs of prototypes and backlog and the deliverables that we'll talk about. But we didn't have the step before that, because Ecolab came to us with that collateral and said, basically, here's the problem statement, and here's our starting point. So we went through this process. We had a UX designer that worked with Stephanie and her team, and there was a couple of different business areas that were engaged, and then went through a rapid prototyping process, aligned on designs and screens that would allow for the capture of the data elements that they had identified, and then built that backlog. And then we went into and then that gave us the kind of the scope and the design of what the build process would be. That started a development project, which then the statement of work represented, here's the delivery that we need to do of that backlog that we articulated, and that's kind of phasing into the next step. That's the handoff. So the outputs, again, I kind of went over this, but we had this high-res prototype that was user validated. Stephanie and her team and the other business teams, were able to click and see the flow, validate that, yes, this is the information that we're going to need. This will really make a difference. The users were excited about it. We built a backlog of the Epics features and user stories that would go into that. And then we built a project proposal. Here's the estimate of time needed to build this out, and the cost, and then was able to present that with the business team and show them the value proposition and get funding. Same as we would with any other design thinking engagement, right? So this was the prototype. These are done in Figma. It's a standard prototyping tool that we use. It started with low res. In fact, they gave us Excel spreadsheets, I think, that had models of here's kind of what it looks like mocked up in an Excel interface. So these are the clickable prototypes. These then are the things that drove our understanding of how are we going to need to architect this. What not only this UI is useful, especially from Stephanie's perspective, because it can validate the usability, but we use it to then determine, okay, where are these data elements coming from? What systems do we need to interface? What type of architecture do we need to put in place? And of course, we had Springboard to use as a platform and leverage many of the capabilities that were already there. So we built this interactive prototype and then a backlog. The view to the left is an Excel model backlog. This is where we always start when we're going through design thinking with people. We will maintain a backlog like this. In this particular case, I think our architect was building it. We have Annabelle in the room, who's a product owner with Mindset. She serves this role on many of our other design thinking engagements. And so as we're going through the design process, as we're mocking things up and making decisions and whiteboarding together in those workshops, Annabelle is feverishly putting together what this looks like from a backlog perspective and the user stories and the epics that represent the work. And then she works with the technical teams to validate approach and all of that. So when Jill talked about the outputs earlier today, these are the things that give you the transition point from design thinking to delivery, right? This backlog directly then was brought into, this is Azure DevOps, which is what Ecolab uses for their Agile Lifecycle Management. So we built the ADO backlog directly from what we had started with from that Excel spreadsheet, and now you've got that bridge from design thinking into a delivery team and structure and foundational backlog in a managed style. So reiterating, from coming out of design thinking, we've got a scope of work. We have a project timeline. We also, given the work that we had identified, we laid it out in a timeline so that Stephanie and her team knew when different phases would be delivered. That's how we did identify. They wanted to get business value sooner, and so we identified it into 2 different releases. One to give them the research phase, which they could start to use immediately to obtain value, while we continued the project and built out the email and approvals phase. Mm-hmm. And so delivered intermediate value as part of the project structure, so they could start to obtain some of the resource savings earlier. That went into the business case of how they got it funded, so that's why that was so important.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say the project timeline was very helpful and we'll get into that more in the future slides, but helping to prepare for when I needed to refine the backlog, when I needed to start building out my test scripts and preparing for testing, planning out, when do people need to be trained? We had so many different users of this tool. I had to train 200 of our sales associates on how to use this when we went live. So just the coordination of that, right? Like preparing to get them all on a call at one time. Was a challenge. So having this timeline right from the beginning to align on the deliverables and expectations with my senior leaders of the full scope, right, was great. I didn't have to do that. I could just take the timeline, plug in my pieces, say this is where there's risk, this is how we need to adjust. So that was really helpful for me, just even like get my work done.
And again, so that's a standard deliverable, but it's done in collaboration. Like we made sure that the timelines fit their business goals and needs, and as well as their business cycle and when training would come along. Working also alongside Ecolab's quarterly releases and the calendar of when things could move to production, et cetera. So all of that was coordinated. So then the other piece is from stepping into delivery, one of the very first activities is solidifying the architecture. So having been through the design, identifying the data sources, we start to then identify what it is and how it is that we're going to build this. And so the technology stack to be used is an important deliverable at this stage as you're stepping into delivery. Identify the stack. What SAP components do you have in place? What cloud components might you be using? What's security components that you need to use, the data, where does that reside, how are you going to integrate that, et cetera. The enterprise landscape, where does this sit within the landscape of other systems, and what kind of constraints and dependencies does that impose, what kind of opportunities can we leverage. So again, having Springboard as an application that we can leverage went into our architectural decisions. Security and authorization, understanding from the designs what are the personas of the users that need to interact with these, what types of capabilities do they need to have and be authorized for, getting security on board with those role designs and how we would use that, understanding user and data volumes, which then go into, design decisions about how we're doing integration, how we're building our interfaces, and how we're structuring our data. And then, of course, the functional domain knowledge, understanding what are the capabilities on the SAP platform that we're interfacing with, how do we invoke those, how do we put the structure around it so that we're not damaging anything on the underlying process, but rather utilizing those. So all those decisions come into architecture. Again, that's one of the early stages then, right at the beginning of your design. Okay, so then once we've got a signed statement of work, our architecture is aligned, now we stand up a team and we do the project kickoff type of work. Important that, these are many of the roles that go into our Agile team configuration. We have a delivery lead or a Scrum Master. We most often provide this role. Sometimes the client provides this role too if they're already running Agile projects. In this case, this was a mindset resource. The product owner is ideally a client, like Stephanie, who served this role, because they own the vision, they understand the business goals, what they're trying to do. I mean, Stephanie was the visionary of what this is going to do for her organization and can make those types of trade-off decisions and guidance to the team as they're building to really bring that to life. If the product owner isn't available on the business side, then we do have product ownership that can come in and align, and that's, for example, Annabelle served that role on another project that we did, and she interfaced directly with the business champion, who was the subject matter expert, but she then made the backlog decisions and grooming and all of the activities that a product owner will do to enable success, and Stephanie will talk more about that in a little bit. We had a UX designer, so we went through the prototyping process in design thinking, leading into then delivery. That same designer came along to provide continuity and to provide iterations of the design as feedback started to develop. And we're seeing what gets built, what's working and what's not. How does Stephanie see a need to change something then that could be reflected in the UX? Solution architect kind of maintained an overall view of how this is being put together and managing to make sure that as the team is delivering, they're holding true to the architecture. And then a business analyst came from the Ecolab side and really kind of represented what functional capabilities we're leveraging, what's unique about those, what could work or not work, and how we hit that functional side. And then we had a front-end devs, back-end devs, and from a mindset perspective, we usually use kind of a blended onshore-offshore team. We've got a very talented group of cohorts in our Mindset India office that provide a lot of the technical expertise on these, but we have front-end developers too, US developers too. So that's how the team gets set up, and then we start to run. So the start of this, once we've identified the team, we've got a signed statement of work, we usually have a kickoff process. And that kickoff process brings all the stakeholders together from the business side, from the client technical side, from our technical side, and we just level set. Here's what we're doing, here's what it's gonna look like, here's the players, here's how we're gonna execute what an Agile process is. And so this is just a way to get everybody in alignment and on board and knowing what different roles and responsibilities are going to be taken care of on the project, right? So we have that kickoff meeting. We onboard the team members that we identified. So every client's a little bit different how they do this. We try to get as far left as we can on that process so that we get authorizations and people access to systems and everything before we get to the first development sprint. When we've seen it delay into development, and teams become unproductive, right? They're not able to get their work done in a timely fashion. So onboarding is as early as we can. And then we get to backlog refinement and the UX adjustments. Stephanie's going to talk to that in just a minute. And then start to do the delivery. We've got, you've got the code that's being developed. You're controlling builds, source control. This is all standard app dev stuff, but this is how you make these things come to life. And then deployment, then we get the functional unit test, which is again, product owner responsibility to make sure that this is meeting up to the vision of what we'd put in place. and then deployment and go live, and then finally a retrospective on usability. So we're gonna dig into a couple of these. This is the Scrum method. Probably not rocket science to everybody. This is just a textbook view of it. We typically deliver our projects that we drive using Scrum as an agile methodology. We have a series of Scrum Masters, both onshore and offshore. All of our team members are very familiar with this. Many times we have to educate the client on how this works and help them to understand the different methodology processes, ceremonies, the purpose behind those ceremonies and processes, and how their role fits into this. And so certainly Stephanie played a very vital role in several of these activities, and she was new to it. She had not had the opportunity to participate in this before. Did a wonderful job of learning and really leaning into it, embracing the opportunity, took it very seriously, and really listened to what things she could do to help this project to be as successful as it possibly could. And so it would not have been without her efforts. So that's what the Scrum method is. That's basically kind of the iterative process that we went throughout build and through deployment. So I'm gonna have Stephanie talk to a couple of the keener aspects of this.
And I would say too, because I was brand new to this, feeling empowered and that I could, tell the mindset team, I'm brand new. I don't know how this process works. Help me. Rob was certainly great in taking time and providing me with really clear expectations and collaboration and guidance on this is how you can, these are the 5 things you can do to make this the most successful project that you can, and things that are in your power, and how you can approach things. So I would say, that vulnerability and that willingness to accept that I didn't know what I was doing and that I did need help and support was definitely key, to opening up those lines of communication and learning to make sure that the project was effective. And so part of that was the backlog refinement. So the first time I saw the DevOps queue, I had a little bit of a panic attack and was like, what is this? What is going on? How did this all get written in here? I mean, the amount of data that was put into that in detail was mind-blowing and so impressive. And then I immediately said, I don't even know how to expand one of these things. I need a demo. And so I think Pam was the Scrum Master at the time. She blocked a couple hours and just talked me through it, This is my process. This is how I manage a backlog. This is how you even use it, Where do you click? How do you create a new story? How do you do these different things? So that was really helpful for me. The backlog refinement is the key piece to keeping the project moving and successful. One of the things that Rob coached me on quite a bit was, what's the minimum viable product, You have this giant list of things that you quote unquote need, but do you really need them? And so one of the things I think we aligned on pretty quickly that I was able to move to a future epic in the DevOps was mobile use. We had a whole series of stories that this application needed to be available on cell phones, and we quickly determined, no, that's not actually a minimum viable product. So, and the other thing too that I heard Rob saying that I think it's really important to highlight and detail as we're thinking about backlog refinement is, I as the product owner, my team of 17 associates are the one that are directly working in this application. So I was the one that was empowered to make the decisions of, okay, if I take this story out, if I change this backlog, if I move this epic or whatever decision I make, the criteria I change slightly, it's affecting my team and it's affecting their day-to-day, and I am fully aware of what that consequence is, and I'm willing to live with that. And I'm willing to speak to my superiors as to why I made that decision. And I think if we had somebody else be a product owner who wasn't as closely tied to the project, the team would not have responded as well to accepting it, There were some things I told them that had to be cut, and they weren't happy. And I said, I made this decision, I understand why, and I was able to explain it to them and then really get them through that change management curve. And so once they weren't happy, they came out on the other side, Because I was able to speak to them on that. The other thing that was really good with the backlog refinement was preparing for testing. So as we're going through and writing the criteria in each of the stories, I was able to take those stories and literally just put them into test scripts. And so that was a really great checklist of, am I testing everything that we built functionality for? And was there something I missed in the criteria? And there were a few instances where, as I was writing the test scripts, I was able to find that and say, oh gosh, we missed one key. I think there was one key piece of information that came out right towards the end, and it was like, oh no, we missed this. We need this in there. And I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't been using that process to write my test scripts.
Right. So she owned all the acceptance criteria for the stories as they were being built. Thank you. Talk a little bit about the retrospectives and the value that you saw there, maybe.
Yeah, so I really felt like the retrospectives were great for me as a new product owner to hear what the technical team was struggling with and really how I could refine the backlog and make the acceptance criteria more clear so that they could be more effective as they were writing. You know, I didn't feel like I had a ton to contribute during the retrospectives. They definitely felt a little bit more technical based, but it was incredibly informative and really was a great touch point of how are we doing? We've just been, you know, talking every day for a couple weeks. Let's take a pause and review. So I think that set aside time to coordinate and calibrate was really helpful and important.
Yeah, and we didn't have so much to say about Stephanie's areas within the retrospectives, largely because she was duly empowered and she was a great fit for the role because of her position in the organization, her knowledge as a subject matter expert, and her ability to then translate that into the project. I've been part of projects where that's not the case, right? And I've got colleagues in the room who've seen the detrimental effects of not having product ownership that can do that, and it will knock teams off the rails. So this is really important, can't really be understated. And the retrospective can be a great place to zero back on that. Like, here's what's not working. Here's where we need more of your help from a refinement perspective, and where we need your presence, whether that be with just time or attention and you know, kind of making sure that that's working. We didn't need to do it with Stephanie, but that's why it was a lighter lift for her. But yeah, technical, any number of ways. It's important to take time to measure and correct on that iterative basis. So that's just part of Agile. Final deliverables. This is a very standard for a Fiori application where you've got a UI5 application code base. That's the Fiori components that you built. They can have, you know, Fiori elements or freestyle components, and you deploy those to your front end, in this case a gateway system that we were deploying towards. You've got back-end ABAP packages that represent the RESTful interfaces and APIs that you're building that interface with the back end. In our case, there's a lot of workflow in that as well. And then you've got an Agile board with a lot of closed stories, but you also have a backlog of work that you didn't get to, right? So all that stuff that Stephanie said, that's not MVP, we don't have time to do that, we need to keep our eye on the ball, did a great job. All that stuff still sits in the backlog, so they could have another project and go after that and deliver incremental value on top of that MVP. And that's the way it's designed to work. You extend what you built when the justification and the value is there to do that.
I may or may not have added more to the backlog.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. Well, we may or may not be available to work on more with you. So, and then in Ecolab's case, they have a standard set of documentation that describes the custom objects that we built. So we make sure that we align with whatever they need to keep compliance with that and are able to support it well moving forward. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's your final product.
Yeah, and the really exciting part about our final product was that there have been other teams that have been able to leverage it within our department. So our department has 4 separate teams, mine being one of them, and right, we built this tool with my team in focus and priority, but 2 of the other teams have also been able to leverage it. There's certainly, you know, aspects, if they had owned it and built it and customized it for their teams, would have done things a little bit differently. But because we really had that process so clearly defined and were able to work through the backlog aligning with the process, the other teams, you know, have been able to adapt their process to be similar enough to leverage it. So we're realizing efficiencies and consistency across our department, which has been really exciting. One of the other teams just rolled it out last week, so it's been great.
Awesome. I know we're right up against time. We have, quick question.
Timeline for the project?
Yeah, so my timeline was like 4.5 years, which was super traumatic. But once Mindset came in and saved the day and got it involved, I think we started the design thinking process in February. And then we began development in end of May, beginning of June. We went live with phase 1 in July, and then the whole tool was launched completely live at the end of September of 2022. So 8 months?
Yeah.
7 months?
Yeah.
One other question. During the retrospective, was anyone from the leadership team attend those meetings?
Yeah, the retrospective is usually for the product team, the dev team, so leadership generally isn't there. Feedback went to leadership from that, though,
I had to provide to my my director and my VP. I was providing regular report outs to them that were, weekly on the project. So they were kind of aware of all of the information that was happening within the retrospectives, but just filtered through me in a much more condensed conversation.
Yeah, as a best practice, we oftentimes don't have leadership in those because then the teams feel a little bit more empowered to speak frankly.
We have one last question. Did you guys have any system demos, like at the end of 2 weeks, kind of show progress?
Yeah, at the end of every 2 weeks, we had a demo as part of the sprint review. That it usually immediately precedes the retrospective. So you do the demo, and that's where people that aren't day-to-day in the project will show up and get to see progress and visibility. The Springboard 4, which we showed at the very beginning, that's a project that we just kicked off. We just finished our first sprint, and I don't attend any of the sprint ceremonies with that project. I attended a lot of these. But for that project, the only one I attend is that sprint review, and they had working software already on the first implementation. That was very exciting. So
that's exciting.
Following Agile to a T in that one. Yeah, you're welcome.
Did you say you had involvement from QA or change management or even business readiness in this entire journey? Or you yourself as a product owner kind of played those roles?
I played those roles, yeah. So I've gone through change management training at Ecolab, and as a leader of quite a large team, that's one of the expectations that my director tasked me with as a deliverable for this project, right? Was not only to deliver a tool, but to train it and manage the change management for all of the teams involved. So that was something that I owned and wore for this project.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. Was the question that I had any review board?
Yeah, I mean, theory, you're exposing, even externally, right? I don't know how it's working there.
Yeah.
But do you have any review board as such, like design review board or IT review board or architectural review board, sometimes in compliance?
Sure.
Any of those involvements during this whole journey?
Yeah, so the question was, did we have any review boards or compliance boards? I would say maybe from the very beginning when this tool when Springboard as a whole was first launched and that phase 1 incentives went live, I think that's probably when it occurred because it was right the very beginning of it. We now are just taking the Springboard application and just putting one additional button in it. So from like a user standpoint, I would say no, but I was sharing things with my team and with some of the users as things were being developed to get buy-in and to make sure that they were aligned with certain things that maybe I had taken out of the backlog and was going to change how they would have to work in it from our customers within the business to make sure that they were still going to use this tile for the approving. Even if we took out some pieces of information. So I'd say maybe an informal review from my perspective, but no formal from my perspective.
And I can 100% affirm that the original Springboard did go through a pretty rigorous architectural review at Ecolab, as well as the design standards were retrieved from internal Ecolab resources too, and that went into the CSS and the styling and the other things that they built on there. That was from Ecolab. Yep.
How big is our SAP team? That's a great question. I have no idea.
Yeah, so we did have, so there's a EBS, which is the business Ecolab Business Solutions team that is an IT counterpart for Stephanie, has functional resources, and so we had a person who was engaged on that project. He's been engaged on all the Springboard projects actually, who provided that functional expertise. Every project that we've done with Ecolab, I think I've done 4 in the last year and a half with you guys, and each one of them has had an EBS functional representative as well as a technical representative that we interface with, and they make sure that we're following their standards and that they're giving us the functional design and spec from, that's going to fit within their template. Yeah, the question is how are we seeing the dependencies? Yeah, for sure we need their security team involved. We use their basis team. We have a dependency on their release management cycle and schedule, and so all of our transports need to get kind of locked in step with them. From a Fiori standpoint, our main dependency was we were working within the Springboard framework, and so we wanted to, be consistent with that and leverage the same tools. That was more of an opportunity than a constraint, though. Frankly, it allowed us a lot of speed to delivery. We had some budgetary dependencies. Certainly, we made design decisions to try and fit within the budget, where there's things that they might have wanted to do with a freestyle control. We tried to use elements where we could and save time and effort. It provides some constraints in terms of overall usability, but again, leads to speed to market. Those are the biggest things, I think. Yeah, the prototyping tool is called Figma, and in Figma you can import all the Fiori elements and controls and things as a standard import from SAP, and then you can use those controls in your layouts, and it has all of the kind of the standard visualization that you would normally have, and so it makes it really easy to model Fiori applications. Figma's not, no, but I think I don't think there's any licensing for the SAP elements, though. Yeah. Okay. I'm certainly available for questions after this. Thank you so much for your attendance, and thank you for the questions, and thank you to Stephanie for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.